All right, let's just jump right in with a question. What if a state government paid out millions of taxpayer dollars, instantly?
Instantly.
Yeah, not based on any verified service, but
Yeah.
just on what someone puts into a simple online form.
If that sounds like a blueprint for, well, massive financial crime,
Hmm.
you're pretty much tracking with what authorities believe happened in Minnesota, the speed of it all.
Mm-hmm.
That's what made the state treasury so vulnerable.
Okay, so let's unpack that. For this deep dive, we're looking at what's been called an alleged billion-dollar welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota.
A huge story.
A huge story, but we're zeroing in on one specific program that sources claim was the hub of the wheel connecting everything.
Non-emergency medical transportation, NEMT.
Exactly, NEMT. You sent us some sources that detail really meticulously how this system for, giving people rides to the doctor allegedly became the main gateway for fraud across the state's entire social services system.
And what's so fascinating is how, I guess, low-tech the alleged crime was. But the scale became staggering. Well, investigators allegedly found this whole network of phantom companies, and they were registered in the most bizarre places. Think liquor stores, mailboxes, empty offices.
Wow.
And these places were billing the state for round trips that average, about $100 a ride?
$100 a pop for services that a lot of the time probably never even happened.
Exactly. Ghost trips.
And according to the source material, the core problem is just.
Right.
It's frighteningly simple. The state allegedly issues payment immediately.
Right. The minute the form is submitted.
Without any kind of mandatory verification. So this created the perfect setup for faking trips and, more importantly, for creating an artificial paper trail.
Which then propped up fraud across the whole system.
Right. So our mission today is to figure out the mechanics behind this. This shocking lack of oversight, how it allowed for millions in potential fraud, and where all that cash ended up.
It's really a story about what happens when, system efficiency is prioritized over just basic common sense, over due diligence.
Right.
And the result is, a catastrophic failure to protect public money.
Let's start with defining NEMT. I think that's central here. For you listening, this is for people who need state aid for transportation.
Right. To a doctor's appointment, a dentist, that kind of thing.
The sources even said sometimes approved retail spots, like Costco, if it was tied to a medical need. But the key is it's non-emergency.
Right. And the whole weak spot is baked right into the billing process. These companies, they submit their claims online through a state portal.
And what do they have to report?
Just two things, really. The number of trips they say they took and the total mileage. That's it.
But the state isn't just paying a flat rate for gas, right? The sources describe a payment structure that seems a little more complex.
Oh, exactly. It's broken into three parts. They get paid for the trip to the appointment.
Okay.
The time the driver supposedly spent waiting for the patient.
Waiting time. Got it.
And then the return trip home. All three components for one appointment.
And altogether, that averages out to what?
The sources estimate that one round trip comes out to about $100, paid by the state.
So if a company claims, say, 100 round trips in a day, that's $10,000 in claims.
$10,000, based on completely unverified data.
Which brings us to the big question. Why? Why did the state, according to the sources, allow this instant payment without checking anything?
The sources really suggest this was a procedural gap that was either created on purpose or just tolerated. They allege the state does not verify these claims before the money goes out.
So let me get this straight. A company says, we took John Doe to the dentist at 2 p.m.
Yep.
And instead of just, calling the dental office to make sure he showed up, the state just releases the money.
Immediately. The $100 reimbursement is sent. No questions asked.
So payment goes out the door the second the form is submitted. That's the perfect environment for ghost trips.
It is. The moment that form is processed, the money moves. It gets rid of any kind of, human review that might flag something that looks weird. It basically created what one investigator called an ATM for fraud.
Okay, so let's move from that structural problem to the sheer scale of this thing, because the numbers, they're pretty shocking.
They really are. According to the source material, right now there are about 1,020 NEMT companies operating just in Minnesota.
1,020. In a single state. That number needs some context.
It does.
The sources pointed out that the national average for a legitimate NEMT company, one with actual employees, vans, maintenance, is around 20 vehicles.
Right, and if you do the math on that, 1,020 companies, each with 20 vehicles. It's a massive, highly visible footprint. You'd expect to see huge parking lots, depots, thousands of drivers all over the state.
But that's not what investigators found, is it? The sources described this huge, almost absurd gap between what was on paper and what was actually there.
It's almost comical if the subject matter weren't so serious. These companies were allegedly registered at addresses that were just clearly not transportation hubs.
Like what?
Liquor stores, money wiring businesses, just a P.O. box or, a small apartment building. There's no way you're running a 20-vehicle fleet out of a mailbox.
And the sources gave some specific examples, which really makes it real. Safari transportation.
Registered at a money transfer business, and it had been billing the state since 2015.
And Dreamline transportation, that one was registered at a liquor store address or sometimes just a bank of mailboxes.
It points to a deliberate system, right? Using shell addresses to create this illusion of a real company.
But there was also physical evidence, or I guess a lack of evidence of them operating. This is where we get to the van graveyard.
Yeah, the van graveyard. So such a powerful image.
Tell us about that because it really sticks with you.
Well, the reports say investigators found actual vans. They were marked with the company names, like Dreamline Transportation, but they weren't on the road.
Where were they?
They were just sitting there, covered in deep snow. No tire tracks, no signs they had moved for months.
So they had definitive proof.
Definitive proof. The state was getting and paying these electronic trip logs every single day, while the vans that were supposedly doing the driving were just immobilized, rusting in the snow.
It's just stunning, the coordination to keep up that billing line while the actual assets were frozen in place. And when they started to add up the cost,
It just exploded. The sources estimate that just 2 of those fake locations could account for over $2.6 million in fraud.
2.6 million from 2 shell addresses.
Right, and there were potentially over 1,000 providers. You can see how the numbers quickly climb into the hundreds of millions. It validates why NEMT was the central problem.
So that brings up the big question. Why was the transportation part so critical to the entire fraud scheme?
And that's the absolute crux of it. NEMT was the hub of the wheel. It was the mechanism that made all the other welfare services look legitimate. It's not just about stealing the $100 per ride.
So it's the linchpin. It's what gives artificial legitimacy to the whole network.
Precisely. Think about the other fraudulent places in the bigger scandal, like childcare centers, adult daycares, or those alleged autism centers.
Okay.
To get their big payments from the state, they have to show activity. They have to prove that people were actually transported to their facility.
I see. So the fake NEMT company provides the fake paper trail. They claim they drove someone to, say, the adult daycare.
Right. Even if the daycare itself was a fraud or the person never went.
So the transportation record is the proof of attendance.
Yes. It validates the payment for the destination.
Huh.
Without the NEMT company filing that trip report, the whole network, the daycare, the health center, it all collapses.
Yeah.
Because from the state's point of view, there's no activity. NEMT makes the whole thing look real.
That makes the transportation part so much more valuable than just the ride fee itself. So once they create this web and the state's money starts flowing, the next question has to be, where did all the cash go?
And this is where the story shifts dramatically into alleged money laundering. And it's based on some really powerful source material.
Which is what?
The testimony of a whistleblower. This person was a former narcotics agent for the airport police at Minneapolis-St. Paul International.
An airport police officer. So this is firsthand information. What did this agent report seeing at the security checkpoints?
The agent saw internal emails. They were detailing people claiming huge amounts of cash at the MSP airport checkpoints.
Because you have to declare that, right, federal law.
Exactly. You have to declare large sums of cash leaving the country.
So what are we talking about here? 50,000? 100,000?
Much, much larger. The smallest amounts reported were around $750,000 in a suitcase. And it went up from there.
Up to what?
Up to a staggering $6 million.
Yeah.
In a single suitcase.
$6 million. And this wasn't like a one-time thing, was it?
Not at all. The sources say this was happening consistently, sometimes twice a week. And it allegedly went on for 5 to 6 years.
And they tracked where it was going.
They did. The cash was flown out of MSP, often with a stop in Atlanta, then overseas to Dubai. And from there, it was allegedly wired to Somalia.
So the sources are strongly suggesting that this pipeline of cash, millions of dollars flowing out of Minnesota every single week, that was the laundered taxpayer money from the NEMT fraud.
It's the physical manifestation of that stolen paper trail. It's the tragic final link in the chain, a system of, lax government oversight, allegedly funding a massive international money movement operation.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means a system that was designed for convenience, fast electronic payments, was exploited for just catastrophic industrial-scale fraud.
And these fraudulent NEMT companies, they were the key. They manufactured the paper trail that made the entire sprawling network of fake welfare claims look real to state regulators.
Which brings us to accountability. The source material points to a disturbing lack of any official response while this was all going on.
For years, investigators were reportedly tracking this specific money movement at the airport for years. And the sources even mentioned politicians being seen, celebrating with people who were later named in these fraud schemes.
The frustration from investigators, according to the sources, was just palpable. It led them to criticize state officials publicly. They're quoted using really strong language.
Phrases like, "shame on you," aimed directly at state officials, including the governor, for what they saw as years of failing to stop the cash from flowing out.
It really speaks to the level of systemic failure described in the sources.
It's the takeaway for you is the sheer magnitude of this procedural failure. Over 1,000 NEMT providers in one state, many of them just ghosts on paper, and they were successfully creating the legitimacy for a multi-million-dollar funnel.
This wasn't a small mistake. According to the sources, it was a failure of governance and oversight on a massive scale. And this entire system, it only worked because the state prioritized quick, immediate payment over basic due diligence. If that one verification step, just a simple phone call to confirm a patient showed up, if that were mandatory before payment,
The whole engine of this specific fraud would have just seized up.
it would have. And that raises a really important question that goes way beyond Minnesota. What happens when these huge centralized welfare systems, which handle billions in taxpayer dollars, are designed or maybe deliberately left without the most basic critical safeguards to protect public money?
And what happens when they become, in effect, a giant unsecured fund that almost anyone with a laptop can potentially tap into?
That's a question that really requires some serious thought about how we audit and manage these public services going forward.